All right, I think we're live. Oh, something went wrong. What went wrong? What's wrong? Is it because it's private? Um, I don't know. Streamlabs is complaining. Anyways, doesn't matter. We are gonna we're gonna be responding to Vaush, or Vaush as he is known around my condo. His takes on Ukraine. Basically, like, okay, I'll just summarize my views. I am an anarchist, and I don't believe that any state inherently has the right to exist. I don't believe Russia should exist. I don't believe the United States should exist. I don't believe Ukraine should exist. And I don't believe my own country, Denmark, should exist. I don't think nations, states, are very conducive, or whatever, if that's a word, towards like democratic kind of societies. I don't believe they're consensual. Like, I never consented to be part of a country. And I generally am in favor of kind of like deterritorialization of the state, and to have kind of more communistic kind of structures in place. So that's kind of where I'm at. I feel like most leftists are really disingenuous, if you could call Vaush a leftist at this point. I think they're very disingenuous when it comes to definitely like foreign policy things, definitely American leftists when it comes to particularly this issue. Anything related to Russia, you just kind of see a complete shutdown of thought, I feel. So I'm gonna be responding to this very frustrating. I haven't watched all of it. I watched some of it, and I'm kind of just gonna be responding to it because I think it's annoying. And I've been like engaging in discourse about this topic since 2014, and everyone will just immediately, just because I don't have this like extremely westernized view of it, people will just like instantly call me like a Russian troll and Putin's puppet, whatever. Which is I'm really not like even pro-Russian at all, so it bothers me. It's annoying, but I'm gonna try to respond to Vosh's arguments. Basically, he's gonna watch this Gravel Institute video, which might have certain flaws that I might respond to. It might be a really good video, and well, he's gonna have his contentious takes. So let's watch it.
Gravel Institute, why? Why are all you people willing to fucking lay your hands down at Russia's feet? Russia's not left-leaning. Being anti-America is not left-leaning.
Okay. Oh man, I hate when they have those previews. That's like the worst shit. I hate it. Alright, here we go.
The Gravel Institute is meant to be like kind of the lefty counter to PragerU or whatever, and I think that's a noble goal. Here's the issue, okay?
Okay.
The issue is if you gaze too long into the abyss, you know, the abyss takes you. 12 minutes. Right. Yeah, okay, fine. People are saying this is bad. How America funded Ukraine's neo-Nazis. All right. Yeah,
that's definitely an inflammatory title, but it's also... Is it true? I don't know if that's true, actually. I don't know if America directly funded neo-Nazis.
Okay, let's take a look at the narrative. I'm no expert on the history.
I mean, the Azov battalion, that's what they called, right? I believe that's what they're called. Were literally inducted into the Ukrainian National Guard. So if the U.S. is supplying Ukrainian army with military, I mean, they kind of are funding certain very far-right militias. So kind of indirectly. I don't know. It's an inflammatory title for sure. Could probably have made a better title to the video, but
of Ukraine, but I am pretty good at identifying propaganda.
Really? I doubt that, Bush. I don't think you are.
Ukraine.
You gay?
You've probably heard about that country a lot. For the last few years, Ukraine has been one of the most important conflict points in the world. It's the site of a proxy war between Russia and the United States.
Russia could...
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Hold off.
Yeah.
Already incredibly bad framing right off the bat.
Okay.
Right off the bat.
I don't
Just
think so.
because different countries have different geopolitical interests for a country does not mean that there's a proxy war happening. There are no U.S. troops there.
Okay, that's not a proxy war. What the fuck? You like if it's a proxy war, isn't that when you like fund? I don't know. Is it even possible to have a proxy war if you literally like invade with troops on the ground, boots on the ground or whatever? Like most proxy wars. Okay, it's like there was a proxy war in Afghanistan, right? When the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan and instituted a regime there. The US engaged in a proxy war by funding the Mujahideen, right? Which later, of course, became the Taliban. So, yeah, like, I don't know why he thinks that proxy war is when you, like, put troops. Isn't that, like, the whole point of a proxy war, that you don't do that? I guess... I mean, Russia is definitely has put troops in eastern Ukraine. So I mean, Russia is closer to like a well, whatever. Let's just keep watching. I think that's a weird contestation, but
There are like thousands and thousands of Russian-backed separatists there. This is just not true.
yeah, and the U.S. supports what Western governments consider the legitimate government of Ukraine. Of course, the Eastern Ukrainians don't consider it legitimate, but anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's keep watching.
A proxy war has to involve, warfare.
Yeah.
Like with our soldiers.
No.
That's important. That's an important part of the whole war
No, I don't think so. I don't think that's true.
thing.
But okay.
Now, you could argue
Should
this.
we like Google proxy war? Let's do it. Oh fuck. An armed conflict between two states or non-state actors, which act on the instigation or behalf of other parties that are not. Fuck. Okay, let's go. Wikipedia. An armed conflict between two states or non-state actors, which act on the instigation or on behalf of other parties that are not directly involved in the hostilities. So yeah, in order for a conflict to be considered a proxy war, there must be a direct, long-term relationship between external actors and the belligerents involved. The aforementioned relationship usually takes the form of funding, military training, so yeah, those two definitely, arms, yep, and other material assistance, which assist a belligerent party in sustaining its war effort. So yeah, I don't know why Vaush don't think, I mean, yeah, the US has supplied the Ukraine with 90% of its military aid. The Ukrainian central government that exists now, after a democratically elected president had been overthrown, basically. And I'm not saying I'm against that. I'm not against that. Okay, I'm not anti-revolution, but yeah, like you can't just, okay, whatever. We're gonna get into all this, okay? So let's just.
This is a proxy war in that it's Russian soldiers fighting against a U.S.-backed domestic force. But that would mean acknowledging that Russia is waging war in Ukraine, which is a line that they want to fight against.
Okay, I don't want to fight against that. Russia is obviously trying to insert its interest in Ukraine. It's obviously trying to, it's obviously fighting war in Ukraine, obviously. It's engaging in proxy war. And even non-proxy war. I mean, they did invade Crimea. I'm perfectly willing to admit that.
Launch an attack on Ukraine any day now.
We are ready, and all of NATO is ready.
But it's also a place most people don't really know a lot about.
That's true.
So the story we hear about Ukraine's history and its conflict today has very little relationship to reality.
That's too harsh.
I'm going to tell you a story about modern Ukraine, but this is also a story about America and how American...
Can't both sides have proxy armies? Generally, a proxy war is when the military of one nation is fighting against a sort of backed nation state on the other hand. You know, like, I guess you could say it's a proxy
No.
war if it's two, like, backed forces fighting each other. Well, yeah, that can happen.
Yeah,
It seems like kind of a semantic thing. The issue here is the
that's true.
framing that America and Russia's interests in Ukraine are, like, equal and parallel.
They're not equal. I would say that Russia has like a much more legitimate national security concern about NATO and its borders than the United States does about Russia kind of interfering in Ukraine. And that's not to like say that I think that Russia's actions in Ukraine are legitimate, but or that I agree with them, or that I like that they're happening. But I think from just kind of realpolitik view and a kind of geopolitics view, I think you can definitely see why it makes a lot of sense why Russia is acting the way they are. It's not an endorsement of Russian action.
That's the main thing that's wrong with
And yeah, like the US don't have the same interest in the same way.
that framing. Russia has been funding tens of thousands of separatists and has literally given rockets and
Yeah.
military equipment.
And the US has been funding a government that popped up after a democratically elected president in the country had been overthrown, who was up for election, I believe, the next year. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that's true. Yeah.
To them, and is literally like brimming up for the invasion, whereas America does not have troops in Ukraine, has pulled.
No, like their ally already got like, okay, there's like a state apparatus, right? There is like instability in the country. There is like a divide between East and West. There is a democratically elected government that was wanted close ties to Russia, and a lot of people, especially in the western part of Ukraine, wanted more closer ties to the West, EU, and NATO. And so they basically had a revolution and they overthrew him. And then like, of course, like people in the East are not just gonna, like what I mean? Like, it's like we just assume because they happen to be in Kiev, because they happen to take control of the central government, there's a state apparatus there, that they're legitimate. We just assume that, and also that the territory of the state must stay intact, and that we should just kind of throw the East Ukrainians under the bus and say like, you don't get democratic participation. I mean, think about it, like the social order as it existed had been turned upside down, right? So whatever, like whatever kind of governmental structure existed before, once you have like a revolution like this, that's all up in the air. And so it is significant that the West just kind of chooses to support this new government, even though largely it's unelected in the separatist territories. Partly that's also because they don't want to have these elections. They don't consider they don't consider the revolution legitimate, because they just don't think that it's in their interest. They don't feel like this like new movement or whatever supports them. So why, if there is in a local area, if there is like a majority of people who, like, I get why you can't have that, like, or I get why liberals don't think you can have like just random separatist movements completely destroying the kind of territorial integrity of nations. But after you have a revolution like this, a violent revolution like this, I mean, it seems perfectly reasonable that the East Ukrainians want the same, right? The West Ukrainians rebelled against the central government in Kiev. They were successful and they took power, and now the East Ukrainians want a different system. So how is it different? And then, yeah, like the US is supporting this new random government against the East Ukrainians, and are supporting like a military what do you call it, intervention on their part.
Out of Ukraine. We don't have anyone in Ukraine right now. The most we've done is arm them, which is something Ukraine wants. The Ukrainian government.
Yeah, not the East Ukrainian though. Yeah, I understand. Russia is arming the East Ukrainians, which is something that the East Ukrainians want. Like, you can make the same argument.
explicitly has sided with the West in this conflict in terms of, like, not wanting to get invaded by Russia. Can't blame them.
money and
Except in the territories of Donetsk and Luhansk. And literally all they wanted was a fucking referendum. You know? Like there might have been a fucking, like there might have been a diplomatic solution here, but the Ukrainian government immediately declared them terrorists. Anyways, let's watch. I'm talking too much.
weapons
It's my first time streaming. It's my first video, okay?
ended up in the hands of these guys, the neo-Nazis and ultranationalists of Ukraine's far right. Let's start in 1991, when Ukraine became fully independent from the Soviet Union. And independence was tough. After the fall of communism, the economies of
Oh, hold on.
Alright.
There was no communism. After the fall of state capitalism,
post-Soviet republics were falling apart. State institutions were being hollowed out. A so-called gangster capitalism was becoming dominant. So in the 1990s, Ukraine's economy and quality of life collapsed. And it's never really got...
wait, 1990s. That article's from 2015. Okay.
1990s, Ukraine's economy and quality of life collapsed. And it's never really gotten better. Adjusted for inflation, Ukraine's GDP per capita was higher in 1990 than it was in 2020.
Wait. I'm pretty sure Ukraine has seen a significant degree of improvement since the fall of the Soviet Union.
Well, yeah, look at the graph. She's saying before the fall of the Soviet Union. Then, of course, you have this fall. You have like a plummeting of GDP. And then you see like it slowly builds up. But it never really, right, it never really, just based on this graph. Maybe the graph is wrong, I don't know. But just like, I feel like Vaush is interpreting the graph wrong. But I'm nitpicking, so whatever.
It's possible the numbers are slanted a bit because East Ukraine is like in this constant state of flux and military engagement. So
I mean,
things
now,
aren't
yeah.
being developed that much there.
See, actually,
Also,
like, I think probably this drop here is from, I don't know if you can see my cursor on the stream, but in like around 2014, there's a pretty significant drop in GDP.
wait, what are these numbers? This is GDP per capita, but over here it's 12 million? No country has 12 million GDP per capita. What does that mean?
Yeah, I don't know. This
Wait,
might
hold
be
on.
wrong. This graph
That would
might
be a very
fucking-
wealthy country.
I don't know.
Hold on. Okay, GDP per capita. 1 second. Gross
Yeah,
domestic...
That's a bit weird. Millions? Yeah,
Okay, can I get this back for...
Do they just mean... I don't know what they mean.
Okay, here we go. So the chart here doesn't start at 0. It starts down here at 1,500. And then up here. Okay, so the basic info being delivered here is correct. That the GDP per capita maxed out around 1989.
Yeah.
And then it fell to its historic low in the 90s. And since then it's
I don't really
hovered
care
at around
about
this
This is
range.
not really the
Do they mean
fundamental
total
argument.
GDP?
really
Whatever
care about.
numbers they're pulling for their chart, the message
don't
they're
care.
trying to deliver is accurate. I still
Well,
think
whatever.
there's been a pretty significant recovery. I've heard promising stuff coming out of
No,
Ukraine.
but GPD is like... GDP is like
Well,
it's
that's
like
okay. We
a
can
don't be all
continue.
of, like,
If
measurement
the
of, like,
graph here matches the trend,
progress,
then
Health outcomes are abysmal. In 2019, the life expectancy of Ukrainian men was lower than in Syria, Iraq, and North Korea.
oh wait, yeah, it should also be noted, by the way, and I think it's pretty important to point this out.
I
That if
guess
you take a look
Syria
at the chart,
wasn't pretty good.
that a drop that was had
Or
right
the
here
Civil War.
corresponded with Russia beginning their proxy war
Well, it's more nuanced than
in East Ukraine. 2014 was when Russia began to fund and back separatist groups.
Okay, I think it's annoying when people just pretend that there is no separatist sentiment in the East, and that it's just all Russia. Like, obviously Russia is funding them. Like, it's just as stupid as saying that, like, no, there are no, like, Ukrainians that want closer ties to, like, NATO and EU. Of course there are. It would be so fucked up to just say, like, oh, they're backed by US, like, oh, US is funding, like, that's how they came. Like, no, obviously there is a separatist sentiment.
So yeah, that's probably not been helping to have just like a third of their country in constant warfare.
I mean, the whole country is at war. It's just like a civil war. I mean, it's the war is mostly taking place, you know, in a certain area in like Donbass, but
That's probably not good. Wait, okay, so this is saying Ukraine GDP per capita. This is from the World Bank, which measures it in PPP, purchasing power, which says that it's been going up consistently since then. There are probably some nuances which describe why this is different from this, and I'm not an economist, so maybe we'll look into that a little bit later.
And as quality of life collapsed, nationalism flourished.
It's not even close. It's not even, like, relevant.
Some people turned to extremist politics, and that was partly because Ukrainian nationalism, formed in opposition to the Soviet Union, tended to have a strongly right-wing flavor. To understand that, we have to look at a crucial figure in Ukrainian nationalist history, a guy named Stepan Bandera. You see, in the 1930s and 40s, Bandera wanted Ukrainian independence from Poland and the Soviet Union. So when the Nazis invaded, Bandera allied with them. His followers massacred huge numbers of Poles and Jews. But in spite of this legacy, Bandera is still viewed as a hero in the west of Ukraine.
Okay, wait. That's pretty disingenuous framing. Viewed as a hero in Western Ukraine? That would be like saying that, that'd be like saying that Adolf Hitler is viewed as a hero in America, because you could find 15,000 Americans who are, like, neo-Nazis. That framing, putting the whole... Here's though I live here in this part is true. Is that true?
Again, like, the Azov battalion was incorporated into the official Ukrainian National Guard, so they don't seem to have that much against, because they fought the Russian-backed whatever in, like, Mariupol, right? So it seems like the official Ukrainian government don't mind associating with Nazis.
True. The March for just 15,000 Ukrainian nationalists.
Like, I don't know if he's, like, a big hero or whatever. I don't know. I really don't. But I suspect that he probably is to a larger degree than, like, Hitler is in the United States.
Doesn't sell the point, but if it's broadly... let me see.
But I don't know.
Bandera support Ukraine. Ukraine's legacy becomes a political... Let me see.
Maybe I should... No.
Football again. I'm seeing articles saying hundreds of people or thousands of people march for him. I wonder if there's, like, an approval poll that I could find, like how many people think positively of him. He's probably celebrated. He's probably celebrated because he's considered to be one of the, like, major forces for Ukrainian independence before the Soviets took over.
There are Stepan Bandera streets, museums, and monuments. In 2010, Bandera was even named an official hero of Ukraine.
It's literally my first time
but
streaming,
Bandera
so
is hated in the East, where Soviet identity was historically a lot stronger. And that East-West divide was a big fracture within Ukraine. In Western Ukraine, there was more
We're being framed very hard here, but I'll wait a bit longer.
Stress on a specifically Ukrainian identity, closer to Europe. In Eastern Ukraine, meanwhile, people were more likely to stress their historic ties to Russia and the Russian language. Fast forward to closer to Europe.
Hard here, but I'll wait a bit longer.
Stress on a specifically Ukrainian identity, closer to Europe. In Eastern Ukraine, meanwhile, people were more likely to stress their historic ties to Russia and the Russian language.
Or, you know, a lot of people actually, based on a study that I read, a lot of people actually also just want independence. They don't necessarily want to be part of Russia. I mean, they might want to have closer ties to Russia, but they don't necessarily, all of them want to be part of Russia. I think in Crimea, the vast majority of people wanted to be part of Russia. And I believe in Crimea, they tried to secede many times from the rest of Ukraine. I mean, I believe, like, an insane amount of people, like, you look at the statistics, an insane amount of people, like, the vast majority wanted to gain independence from the West, from the rest of Ukraine. And they were time and time again prevented from doing so by the central government in Ukraine. But you can imagine that after a violent overthrow of the previous government, then of course they're also gonna want a taste of democracy, right?
Language.
Of independence.
Fast forward to 2010, when Ukraine elected a relatively pro-Russian politician named Viktor Yanukovych.
Relatively?
I don't know.
When Yanukovych was cracking down on the protesters and, killing them, Putin said that he would withhold aid unless he killed them harder.
kill
Like,
them harder.
he was literally just a Russian puppet. He fled to Moscow afterwards.
That might be true. Let's figure it out. Let's just search for it. Nukovich, like that? Okay. Okay, what should we search to find out? Putin protests. I feel like this all discourse about this is so toxic and like full of misinformation, especially on like probably on both sides. I mean, Russia even denied that they even went into Crimea, saying that they were like just Russians on vacation, volunteers. Okay, dude. I don't believe that for sure. That's how you know I'm not like just a complete fanatic of Russia, you know, like that's ridiculous. Anyways, I don't see any of it. I don't care. I really don't care. 2013? No, I don't know. Maybe
He was a
Vaush is
Russian
right. I don't know.
puppet.
He
Relatively.
definitely had ties to Russia, for sure. I think it seems like a pretty unnuanced to just kind of... It feels like you're reducing complexity. To just say like, oh, he was a Russian puppet, end of story. I feel like it's probably a bit more nuanced than that, but whatever. Like, he was definitely tied to Russia. He was allied with Russia. He wanted closer ties with Russia. So.
As its president, with strong support from voters in the East. Yanukovych pursued a regionalist and Russia-friendly agenda, which angered people in the West. And in 2013, Yanukovych announced that he was suspending discussions on Ukrainian integration with Europe.
Damn.
That decision...
What does that mean, suspending discussion? Like making it illegal, or like in parliament? I don't think he could do that. I guess he just, because he was in charge of the government or whatever, so I actually don't know. I mean, I'm not gonna like sit here and talk about shit I don't know about.
Sparked a protest movement centered in Kyiv called Euromaidan.
Of course it does matter. Like, I'm not a supporter of Yanukovych, right? And I think if West Ukraine want close ties to Europe, okay, fine.
The Maidan Square, where it took place.
In Kiev,
but I don't see why you have to force the eastern parts of the country with you.
Thousands of Ukrainians continue to protest against the government's decision to hold off on signing a deal with the EU.
In the West, Euromaidan was seen as a peaceful, pro-democracy movement.
Oh no.
And most participants really were ordinary people who were angry at the government.
Okay.
But as the protests grew, encouraged by a harsh repression from the police and a brutal sniper attack that killed dozens...
So they're really very like... They're not like just like complete fanatics either, right? They're like clearly coming at it from... They're not just coming at it from this like pro-Russian troll whatever side. Like
dozens of protesters and police alike.
Okay, all right. I was worried we'd go this whole thing without mentioning the brutal crackdown of the police killings. Okay, all right. Okay, I'll take what I can get.
That did happen. Yeah, absolutely.
A new, more sinister element emerged and began to hijack the movement. The ultranationalists came on the scene.
It was often the nationalists who were the loudest and the most violent.
It's very like in times like this, when you have like a lot of should we say like galvanization. I think it can be very easy to manipulate the situation, and who knows what went on behind the scenes. You know, like, there's a lot more that we don't know than we know. You know what I mean? But again, it's not really central to my argument here. Like, the fact that there were... I would say the Azov battalion is, like, such a good example, because they were literally, basically a neo-Nazi group, you know, that was officially inducted into the National Guard of Ukraine. So that was, like, you really can't run away from that, kind of, you know. Like, a lot of the other stuff, it's like a little bit, it's happening in the shadows. Certainly there was a neo-Nazi, there was like a far-right sentiment among the protesters, but like how wide is that? I don't know. I don't want to speak about it. It's something, it would be interesting to research it more, but I'm not really in a position to do that right now. And I don't know if it's really that important to me to do it right now.
So yeah, to me, this is like saying that Antifa hijacked BLM. Antifa may have been one of the most visible and, like, I guess, optically aggressive elements of the BLM movement, but everything that I've looked up from the protests against Yanukovych have made it seem as though, like, just because these guys were in the same protests and were, like, the more violent dudes, that doesn't mean that they were, like, the flavor of the whole thing. You know what I mean?
Sure.
This is a very common tactic in disenfranchising popular movements.
Yeah, but you're doing the same to the separatists, and you're not even giving any kind of leeway. I mean, to them, like, you're even, like, you talk about them as if they don't exist, as if, like, the Ukrainian population is just this united thing that has, like, that basically made a democratic decision, and then these evil Russians are funding these, like, terrorists, you know, like you have a very, well, we're gonna see later in the video, like, how you call them terrorists, but have a very you don't apply that same honesty, kind of intellectual honesty, to the separatist movement.
Is when there's a very...
You're, like, again, you're reducing complexity. You're reductive. So have some more nuance, Vaush, okay? Like, you're talking shit on them, on this Gravel Institute, for, like, insinuating that the far-right sentiment is, like, the flavor of the movement, but, like, you literally do that to such a much larger extent when it comes to the separatists.
Extremist group within that movement that you then point to and make them, like, representative of the entire thing. I'm not sure about that comparison. Oh, I'm pro-Antifa and anti these guys. I'm just saying the strategy is the same. Guys, I'm talking about the strategy, not the moral equivalent.
Sure. Damn, my voice is so weird today. Maybe it's just because I'm streaming, I get self-conscious about my voice. Ooh, I posted a video.
Here. It's the strategy of, you know, well, this group we really, really, really don't like. Yeah, but they were there. I'm not saying they weren't.
Blah, 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 blah.
Antifa were also at BLM protests,
Boring.
you know?
Come on,
I'm only saying that
get to the good
as a way of attacking a broader popular movement. You look at the most you know, the most extreme or the most, you know, optically damaging elements, and you overstate the extent to which they influenced it. From what I looked up, the ousting of Yanukovych, this was like the far-right nationalists did not need to be a part of this protest for everything to go down the way that it did. Does that make sense? Like,
that might be true.
It seems like everything pretty much would have went down exactly the same way if the far-right nationalists, the Nazi types,
It kind of depends on how you classify far-right, which is kind of an arbitrary definition, because the concept of, like, right-wing or left-wing are also arbitrary definitions. I mean, I would say that the idea behind the nation state, you know, it is kind of far-right. This idea that there's just this, like, even if it's like a democratic process behind it, like a voting, for example, like this idea of, like, oh, I just have the central power that has this, like, territory, and it just gets to completely have this totalitarian control over that territory. I think that is kind of far right, you know? I mean, that idea comes from, like, monarchies, right? Like, it literally, which are, I think, those are probably far right institutions as well, you know? Extremely authoritarian. And of course you have, like, they institute property, you know, like capitalism, which also, you know, pretty far right, I think, pretty totalitarian system, dictatorial, if you will. So yeah, I just don't know. There is a specific danger when it comes to fanatics of the state, which I really think the nationalists are, far-right nationalists, Nazis. Of course, there's a certain intensity to them that is very concerning. But yeah,
not been present. They were just,
I don't know. I'm getting off track. So
had a shared interest because they hate Russia. You know.
Yep.
76% of those who live in Western Ukraine have a positive opinion towards Bandera. Damn! That is a lot of people. Wow. Well, the premise that was put forth at the beginning of this video is totally correct. in that bad conditions, like a failing economy or national pressure, can force people towards extremist movements. The same way that our invasion of Iraq laid the conditions for the formation of ISIS, Russia's constant pressure on Ukraine and the history of their suppression by Russia or the Soviet Union causes, some pretty fucked up shit to go on. Ukraine is a historical victim of imperialism, and for that reason, while I'm not willing to give an ounce of sympathy to any of the far-right groups within Ukraine, I'm willing to give sympathy to the idea that Ukraine is acting as a product of more powerful nations with them. In the same way that any individual ISIS member can drink bleach for all I care. But, like, if I was going to point at Iraq or Syria, I wouldn't go like, oh, well, these people are just bad. I would go like, okay, well, these people are bad, but, like, we pretty clearly lay the groundwork with American imperialism here. We pretty clearly... We very obviously...
I mean, you see, like, a rise of far-right nationalism all over Europe, so I don't know. I don't know if it has that much to do with I mean, there's probably a connection, because there probably is a connection. I think the specific configuration of how the far right exists in Ukraine is definitely very tainted by kind of the Ukraine's relationship to Russia, for sure.
Laid the foundation.
But I still think there would be like a huge amount of nationalists or whatever without it. Of course, it's hard to speculate because it's something that goes way back and it's something that is such a dominant aspect of Ukrainian politics. So.
In this case.
A group calling itself the Right Sector is perhaps the largest. Its members can be seen marching around Kiev in columns of about a dozen.
Just like how Russia's...
Do you remember actually this like insane... the whole... It almost turned into like a war in the streets. Like I remember seeing videos of just like blood flowing. Literally like pools of blood. And people just beating the shit out of each other with clubs and... Damn, it was insane. Like I don't think you should downplay just they definitely made their mark, these some of these groups, these militias or whatever.
Invasion was a response to NATO expansion? Yes, those things are exactly the same. Iraq being invaded and hundreds of thousands of people being killed by the military and by sanctions is literally identical to Russia, the sovereign nation, having to suffer the indignity of being around countries that joined a defensive alliance somewhere near them. Those are identical, yes.
Groups like the, quote, Right Sector, the ultra-nationalist Svoboda Party, originally called the Social National Party of Ukraine.
I know those.
Try turning those words around.
Well,
I agree. Like I don't know the degree to which these aspects were like. I just think there are like probably better arguments than trying to just frame Western Ukraine as like neo-Nazi. Although there are serious neo-Nazi elements, for sure. But I think I would probably go about talking about this a little differently, and I guess that's what I'm doing now. So
you don't need to rearrange the words, buddy. We can see their flag. we know what they're doing here.
Yeah.
Jesus, this is impressive. It is simultaneously the SS lightning bolts and the swastika. It's actually both of them. That's actually pretty clever design. They were like, we're actually more Nazi than the Nazis are. We're gonna have both of the most memorable Nazi iconography elements. It's called the
as a small
Wolfsangel.
But influential organized minority within the protests. And those extremists played an important role in exacerbating the protests by encouraging violence and more radical rhetoric. Yeah. There are allegations that the sniper attack was actually orchestrated by the Right Sector and its co-conspirators.
Allegations.
Yeah.
I would need to see some pretty strong evidence of that.
Me too.
Like, the Ukrainian police were fighting against the protesters. The Ukrainian police were ordered to fight. Like, what? Okay, this is conspiracy bait right here. This is just full-on conspiracy.
I have no idea. Actually, it's interesting. Like in Europe, there's also in Romania, there was like this random sniper attacks, which actually caused a lot of chaos. Like, I don't have time to go into it now, and I'm a little rusty on the details, but there was in Romania, there was like a very there was like a revolutionary moment where anyways, whatever. There's a lot of weird, and no one knows. Okay, whatever. There's a lot of weird shit in like European history about like sniper attacks at like very like tense moments that kind of determine the course of history. It's actually super weird. Like we don't really, we can only speculate about who are in charge of it and who, you know.
Bait, false flag bullshit right here. Isn't the Nation a leftist source? First of all, never trust leftists when you're talking about Russia, because you never know who's a real leftist and who's just anti-American. Second of all, it doesn't matter where the source is from.
A real leftist is, of course, like the most liberal, you know, Vaush fan.
Like, I'd want to know. Like, I need some good. Hey, if there's evidence for this, but like this, all this video says is allegations, and it like cites an article. Like, okay, you know.
Yeah, that's kind of weak.
By early 2014, the government lost the ability to control the protests.
In a rapidly evolving political crisis, President Yanukovych has been voted out by parliament, forced to leave Kiev.
Goodbye.
And the U.S. recognized interim government that replaced him had a significant far-right.
I'm sorry, hold on.
Has been voted out by parliament, forced to leave Kiev.
And the U.S. recognized interim government that replaced him had a significant.
I don't like the use of the term U.S. recognized. The implication here, first of all, the United States recognized Yanukovych as well. We recognize, like, pretty much all leaders around the world in a diplomatic...
Not after a revolution. You don't necessarily recognize them. Not after they've been, like, the previous democratically elected president has been overthrown. Right? That doesn't always happen.
Makes sense. Unless it's...
Like, again, you're so willing, you're so ready to just say, like, oh, well, I guess they're just, like, the legitimate Ukrainian government now. And fuck the people of the East Ukraine who didn't really consent to this. I mean, at the end of the day, this is like a constitutional crisis, right? It has to be. The social order is up in the air. Let's not pretend that there was some, like, kind of business as usual transfer of power. It's not what's going on here.
Unless, like, we just deny the existence of the country. This framing makes it sound like they're a puppet of ours, you know?
I mean, there might not be a puppet. Whatever. They're completely accurate in what they're saying. Like, they're saying it's a U.S. recognized government. Not all governments recognized. Most Western governments immediately recognized this more pro-Western, pro-EU government after the overthrow of the previous one. Yeah, no shit. Of course they do. I mean, it's in their interest to do so, right? Like, but it's not obvious that we have to, and or that all Ukrainians have to recognize them. And it's definitely not obvious that when there is a separatist sentiment in the eastern parts of the country, southeastern part of the country, that they should just be crushed. And that we should just throw them under the bus after the West Ukrainians had their basically had their time to shine, you know, had their time to assert their own power. And that's great. Good job. But, like, also let the East Ukrainians do the same, right? Let Crimea do the same.
You know, like, we backed them. Recognized? Like, that makes it sound so sinister. We recognize government leaders all over. Like, we recognize Xi Jinping. We recognize Putin. All that means is that we acknowledge they exist for diplomatic purposes.
It's gonna take a long time, isn't it?
Significant far-right faction.
No, it's that you support them, and you support them against other parts of the country. It's not just for diplomatic reasons. You support this government, and you support them against other parts of the country that don't agree, and that this central government now wants to crush. That's not trivial, and it does matter. There's not just a physical war. There's also a war of the narrative, right?
The Deputy Prime Minister, the Minister of Defense, and others were all from that far-right party, Svoboda. And this led to...
Really?
And others were all from that far... The Deputy Prime Minister, the Minister of Defense, and others were all from that far...
Damn. That's also pretty crazy. If that's true, I think, I don't know, like, that would be pretty easy to fake. I actually didn't know that. I remember my dad saying something about that, but I didn't know they were from like this, like, was that the one with the fucking SS mixed with the swastika? Alright, I mean, I don't know why, like, I don't know why, like, then, I don't know, that makes me think that there is some legitimacy to the idea that the far right had like a big influence here.
Far-right party, Svoboda. And this led to...
I don't know the details on this, but, like, just to be clear, Ukraine does have a serious far-right problem. I'm not denying any of that.
Okay, Vaush.
So, like, that's
Vaush.
fine,
Sorry.
you know. It's...
Almost
backlash in the East, because Eastern Ukrainians were horrified at what they saw as a
I mean, that's the premise of this video, so...
far-right seizure of power, with veneration of Bandera...
Oh, it should also be noted, by the way, that Yanukovych was also far-right. Keep in mind, being a pro-Russian puppet means that you are also far-right. They're both far-right. They're just, some of them are Western-aligned far-right, and some of them are Russian-aligned far-right. Like that, it's this is very much a two fighting situation.
I don't know if being, like, allied with Russia means that you're far-right. What if you're, like, literally, like, have, like, a socialist system, but you literally just have, like, imagine, like, a fucking anarchist commune or something, like, imagine if, like, Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic were, like, fucking, like, anarchist communes, but they were just kind of allowed to exist, and they were just completely fucking, like, I don't know, maybe, like, Kropotkin fans, or, like, just, like, very, like, far, like, anti-state kind of leftists, you know, like, but like Russia just kind of tolerated them there, or maybe even supported them because they acted as like a buffer zone. Like, would you still call them like far right? Because would you call them far right because Russia supports them? And I mean, you're using this term puppet as if they have no, you know, puppet kind of implies that you have no agency, right? Which I don't know if that's true for Yanukovych. I think there are some things. I think when a country, a smaller country, is next to like a kind of great power like Russia, I think, or like Canada with the United States, for example, I think there are just certain things that, from like a realpolitik point of view or whatever, that is outside of your agency, and then there are certain things that you have the capacity to do in order to maintain your power. I mean, at the end of the day, you are going to be like dominated by that force, and I'm not saying that's a good thing, or that it's an acceptable thing. I'm not saying that. That's why I'm not against them rebelling against the Yanukovych administration.
An elimination of equal recognition for languages like Russian.
Service industry workers have since January been obliged to talk to customers in Ukrainian unless clients specifically ask to switch.
If I work, pay my employees' salaries and my taxes, it's none of your bloody business.
Obliged to talk to customers in Ukrainian unless service industry workers have since January been obliged to talk to customers in Ukrainian unless clients specifically ask to switch.
If I work, pay my employees' salaries and my taxes, it's none of your bloody business which language I do it in.
Anti-government protests.
You know, the Ukraine, like Western Ukraine or whatever, like Ukrainian government or whatever, this Ukrainian state has like done some fucked up shit in terms of like restrictions on things like language. Like, they have literally just made any kind of separatist sentiment, even the thought of separatism, they have made completely illegal. They have made these like posters encouraging, like, I just remember seeing this from throughout the years I've been following this conflict, and like so I don't know if I could find it for you right now, but they have literally made these like propagandic posters telling people to like look, like, to report the neighbors and stuff if they suspect there's any separatist kind of sentiment with them and stuff like that. So they're clearly and really going hard, like, you know. It's also interesting, right? Like, so what, like, Vaush really wants to, and a lot of Western governments really want to legitimize this this new Ukrainian government. But I mean, if you don't even have this like basic free speech, do you even have democracy at that point? I mean, I think that kind of challenges some aspect of this like liberal democracy that people seems to love so much. When you don't even have this basic free speech to speak the language that you want. But I don't know. Could be a lie. She could be a hired actor. She could be telling lies about it. Maybe they don't actually have these kind of requirements when it comes to language. I don't know.
Broke out across the east.
I wonder what
In the
Vaush
eastern
is gonna say
peninsula
about
of Crimea, people were furious.
Oh no.
Many of them talked about joining Russia. So
Oh,
the
no.
Russian government saw an opportunity. They wanted to encourage a surge of Russian nationalism for its own benefit. So Russia annexed Crimea and held a disputed referendum to legitimize the decision.
As many as 9.
That is very neutral framing for an annexation of another nation's territory. Like, when the other guy got elected, it's like U.S. recognized leader in the interim government. And then Russia just invades a part of the world. And it's like, well, there was an annexation, and then they had a referendum. Yeah, this is very, very interesting, the relative degree.
Yeah, because it's a pretty unique situation where like the vast majority of people wanted more integration into Russia and had tried to secede many times, but were prevented by doing so by the central government in Kiev. But now, after overthrow of the previous democratically elected government, yeah, like that kind of changes the things, right? So it's kind of like a unique situation, yeah, for sure. And yeah, I don't know, like.
Of perceived sinister behavior.
I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot, but I feel like I'm just not getting through to like whenever I talk about this, like it's like falling on deaf ears. It's crazy.
They're putting forward there.
Like yeah, I don't like that Russia did that. But I'm also not gonna have this like lip cock take like oh no, like I'm not. Like this, it's like a nationalist take. It's like this idea that like Ukraine is like a real thing, that any country is like a real thing. Like the coherence of a country only matters insofar as like the citizens of that country actually wants to be part of it, actually agrees with the direction. That's what matters. What matters isn't that like Ukraine is not like a people in that way, you know, like no country, also my own country, Denmark, it's not like, there is no such thing as like the Danish people that has like a will of its own, right? No, like we have like different ideas, right? There are certain like commonalities, you can say like in general, people think this way and the government should reflect that, but like Ukraine is a very divided country, and these areas of like Crimea, for example, I mean, again, like overwhelming sentiment for to secede. So like, I don't know, like, I feel like it's like they annex the country, yeah, like they invade Crimea and they annex it. Like that's like literally just like the facts. It's like, yeah, it's a neutral way of framing it. Why not make it neutral?
Also,
and yeah, they called the other government U.S. recognized, not even like U.S. backed or anything. U.S. recognized. Like yeah. Like, that's also just like a neutral way of framing it. That is a neutral way of framing it. Calling the Kiev government US-backed. Makes sense to me, to be honest.
I'm pretty sure, like, they had heavily tilted the scale on that one, right? Like, Crimea was a source of, like, Russian, like, intel, like, muddling for quite some time. Like, Russia always does this, you know? If you're next to Russia, you know?
What?
I hope you know Crimea was an autonomous republic and still is. They were part of Ukraine, and then Russia annexed them. Svoboda only won 0.013% of total seats in the 2014 Ukrainian parliament elections. Wait, this is the group that they were saying was like super far right that was part of their government? Hold on. Which is the Svoboda party?
No, it was
Svoboda or whatever. Is it called something else? The Freedom Party? Naturally.
Is that what it is?
6 out of 450. Well, alright.
Okay, that's not...
95.5% of the electorate in Crimea have voted to join Russia. We are going back home. Crimea is in Russia.
Energized by the annexation.
Yeah, we watched the video from Adam something, but the referendum that was held in Crimea was also heavily weighted, very much a, you know, German Nazi election. Do you want to elect Hitler? Gigantic yes bubble, tiny no bubble. Where the two choices they were given were be a part of Russia or be independent as a part of an old charter that wouldn't have applied anymore. So they weren't given, like, the referendum didn't ask them if they wanted to stay part of Ukraine. Like, you think Russia would invade and then give them that chance? Like, do you think Russia would commit to invading Crimea and annexing them and then go like, okay, well, do you want us, or like?
Yeah, so that's a good argument that's a good argument. If that's true, I don't know if that's true, but yeah, like they should definitely have put that in there. And that would have they would have probably still, like, I'm quite sure they would have still voted to remain within the Ukraine. And they would probably have more legitimacy, you know? Like Russia would have more kind of legitimacy in like their narrative or whatever. So they should have left that option there, I think. Still, the outcome is more in line with the kind of the will of the people in that area than the kind of the central government in Kiev would have wanted, which would have been, you know, to just follow in line with the kind of western parts of the country, what they want.
We can go back if you want. Like, no, of course not, you know. It's pretty stupid. Also, even if you wanted to be hyper charitable and say that, like, unequivocally Crimea wanted independence or they wanted to be part of Russia or whatever, that doesn't mean that it's not Russian imperialism. Like,
no, it doesn't. You're right. That's right. I don't like when any country tries to expand its power and tries to integrate other, like by force, other parts of the world. But I also don't like this idea that there is any value to any territory being part of any country. To be honest, I think that's kind of dumb. Like, God, I'm getting tired. Whatever, let's keep watching.
Ukraine wants to be a part of NATO, but it gets framed as Western imperialism for NATO to, like, even consider having Ukraine a part of them. So why is it that Crimea's perceived desire to be a part of Russia means that it's not Russian imperialism, but you know, NATO?
Well, the fucked up thing, well, this is like a very big conversation, like in terms of NATO. I mean, it's not like the United States, whatever, like any kind of like Russian-backed organization, even if they claim to be a defensive alliance, they wouldn't allow that on the border of the United States. I mean, we know that from the Cuba crisis, right? And yeah, like this idea that that's like defensive, this idea that like if any kind of war happens between you and like your neighbor country, like you're gonna be at war with like basically the whole world. Like that's not that. Of course, that's like a security concern, and of course Russia is not gonna like just assume that it's like a defensive alliance in that way. Like they would be like dumb to just be naive about that. Like, what else did he say? Let me hear what he said.
Why is it that Crimea's perceived desire to be a part of Russia means that it's not Russian imperialism, but
it is.
You know,
although I would say I don't think Russia just wants to expand indefinitely in the same way that like empires tend to. I think Russia, well, I mean the geopolitics of Russia. I mean, in Russian history, there has been a lot of invasions of Russia, and the land where, for example, Ukraine is and like Poland and all these countries is very flat. meaning that it's very easy to invade. So the kind of the Russian strategy historically has been to push as far west as possible. So for them, it's just it's like I think it's more like a national security thing and like a realpolitik thing, where I think when it comes to the kind of imperialism we see with like the American imperialism, it's a lot more kind of extractionist, capitalistic in that way. And the Russian kind of, like, you call it imperialism. I'm not like super against calling it that. I just don't think it's as expansionist and extractionist. And I think there's like kind of like a limit to it to an extent. And I think Russia has generally preferred for these countries to be like neutral, and that just hasn't happened, right? Like they have allied with NATO, and then Russia is reacting to that. And I'm not saying they're right to, but I'm also, like, what is like a good example of it? It's like you go to like a bear's cave and poke it with a stick, right? Like, yeah, like, is it fair that it like is gonna eat you? Okay, that's a bad example. Whatever. I'm getting tired.
NATO
Let's keep watching.
Ukraine wanting to be part of NATO is.
I'm not pro-Russian, okay? I'm not pro-military Russian military intervention or anything like that. I just want to make that clear. And if Vaush wants to call it Russian imperialism, that's fine.
Isn't an invalidation of perceived imperialism on NATO's part. It's very inconsistent.
And supported by Russian armed and military personnel, the anti-government protests became a full-blown secessionist movement. Eastern provinces like Donetsk and Luhansk held separatist referendums and declared independence. The new government branded these rebellions as, quote, terrorist action.
They were literally terrorist groups, and they were funded directly by Russia. Yeah, they were.
Yeah, like, so what if they were funded by Russia? Like, literally, there was an overthrow of the government. Like, I've said this a million times. I think it's so insane how the central government in Ukraine, after literally, there was like a fucking war in Kiev. Like, literally, like a war in the streets. And, like, a new government emerges as, like, an elected government, like a democratically elected government that was scheduled for another election next year, was, like, overthrown. And, like, fine. They were, like, violent to protesters, blah, blah, blah. Fine. Overthrow them. But, like, yeah, like, they're also gonna want certain, like, independence then. Like, of course, like again, like, the governmental structure was gone, right? So, like, and it's so disingenuous, like, honestly using the word terrorism, like, today, like, in, like, 2022 or whatever, like, even, like, using it, like, in the aftermath of, like, the war on terror and, like, the fucking disaster that was, kind of like, imagine, like, being, like, a leftist and using the term terrorists. Like, how brainwashed do you have to be?
No, they were pretty unequivocal. They were shelling Ukrainian cities with rockets.
Wasn't that, like, after the I'm not sure about this, like, I'm pretty sure that was after the Ukrainian central government called them terrorists and decided to like invade them, basically, or, like, intervene militarily. They instantly did that. Like, literally, I remember seeing on Vice, I remember just seeing, like, this, like, a referendum, because Vice was actually doing excellent, very neutral reporting back then of the Ukrainian conflict. I think they called it, was it called Russian Roulette or something? The series? I believe it was. And, like, I saw, like, these people, they were just these, like, boomers, these, like, Eastern European boomers, like, old women and shit, like protesting and demanding referendums. And instantly the central Ukrainian government declared, just for them, like, demanding independence and, like, asking for referendum, they decided to just label them terrorists. Which means that you don't have to look at, which means terrorists don't really have rights, right? You don't have to kind of, like, look at the legitimate conditions that lead to this, like, separatist sentiment. and like the case that they have in this situation. Like they just immediately, it's a very dehumanizing term, I think. And yeah, I just don't. I think it's insane for Vaush to just agree that they're just like, oh yeah, they're just terrorists, when it's like literally just like people just want in a certain area, like the majority of people want as independence from Western Ukraine. So like to call that terrorism is like insane. And I'm like, anyways, whatever.
They weren't just like peacefully protesting. First of all, I'm pretty sure that you can't just like decide to leave the country. Generally countries don't let you do that. So yeah, but if you're, there were tens of thousands of separatists. They were military.
But after the social order of the country has been completely destroyed, sure, you can do that. I'm like, would you say the same about like Rojava in Syria? Would you just say like, well, Syria was there first, like that's like the original, that's like the country that was there first, so we should just automatically support al-Assad against the Kurds? Like, no. And I'm like, didn't Vaush used to call himself like an anarchist? Like, I don't know if he does anymore. Like, it's pretty clear to me that he's just like a liberal. Like, if you like really like, they're not real countries. Like, I mean, I guess like if you're an anarchist watching Vaush, I mean, don't even like think about any kind of insurrectionist leftism, any kind of mutual aid, any kind of challenging like the fundamental property relations in your country, power relations. Don't think about that, because Vaush is just gonna like, they're gonna be labeled terrorists immediately, right? By the government. Like I think it's so insane how Vaush is just willing to say there's a new government that's largely unelected in the eastern parts of the country. How it's just how willing he is to just say like, no, that those are the representatives of the whole territory, and basically just fuck these guys in the east. Like, I think that's insane.
Groups. They were funded. They were given arms by Russia. They shelled
and the new Ukrainian government was given arms by the US. They needed arms, by the way. This separatist movement needed arms to protect themselves. Rojava in like the Kurds, Syrian Kurdistan, right? They were fucking given weapons by the US. Does that mean that they're also terrorists? I don't think so. Let's just stop using that word, because it clearly doesn't mean anything. Like, people just use it to refer to non-state actors now, when terrorism, literally, states can do terrorism, you know? Like, when I think about terrorism, I think more about it as like a psychological kind of method of control. So 9/11 is a great example of terrorism, because it's not the impact of the attack itself that's important. Like, it's like a physical, people dying, or like, you know, infrastructure damage. It's not like that. It's actually like the symbolic value of it, and how it like creates this like sense of terror within the population. I don't think the fucking like separatists can be described that way. I don't think so. I think all armies, I think to military, I think to war, there's like terror is a central element to war. I think that is certainly the case for, I mean, what is like the central doctrine of like the modern US military, like shock and awe, like we saw in Iraq? Like the idea of like shock and awe. It's like almost, it's very similar to like the Blitzkrieg, right? There is an element of terror to that. That is like this like insane barrage that kind of paralyzes whatever nation. You know, there's a terrorist element to that. There's definitely a terrorist element to bombing Dresden in World War II, or like dropping the nuclear bomb on Hiroshima. That's definitely, I mean, that's just, I couldn't imagine a more clear-cut example of terrorism. But now it just means anyone that a central government don't agree with. And it's like, and I feel like Vaush is just not engaging with the argument that is like, no, like people don't believe that they are the legitimate state representatives of the state. So you can't just assume that they're legitimate representatives of the state after democratically elected president has been overthrown, and that the whatever opposition is just terrorists.
Civilians, they killed people. What do you mean?
Yeah, all armies kill people and civilians. So, like, I mean, if you can like point to an example where they literally just kill civilians, but okay, like the downing of the plane. I don't remember what the plane was called. M something, whatever. Yeah, like I don't know like how people always use that example to legitimize like all separatists and just be like fuck East Ukraine, like they don't get to have self-determination because like some random people shot down a plane, like, and like all these like conspiracy theories that like, oh, Vladimir Putin himself ordered this plane to be like downed. Like I doubt that, but I mean if you can really like point that instance to like some kind of, if it came from like the upper leadership of like the separatist movement, or like the war, whoever's in charge of like the war effort or whatever you call it, I mean then you could say like, okay, yeah, that's definitely like a terrorist action by the separatists. But I don't think you could use that to just say like, oh, like all separatists are terrorists. And they called them terrorists before this happened as well, right? That was like the first thing. As soon as like the new like Ukrainian government heard about any kind of separatist action in the East, sentiment in the East, they were quick to label them terrorists. So that, again, that shuts down in Western audiences and Western media, and like it shuts down any kind of thought about it, any kind of nuance, as soon as you call people terrorists. So I think that's like very irresponsible.
Dude, this video is so sussy, man.
You're sussy.
Why Gravel Institute, why are all you people willing to fucking lay your hands down at Russia's feet? Russia's not left-leaning. Being anti-America is not left-leaning, okay? There are far-right governments that are anti-American. This is not.
But also the idea that like the idea of liberal democracy is not left-leaning. The idea that like even just the idea that a majority in a country, like a representative of a majority of the country that votes for you, that you can use that power to force certain parts of that territory to kind of fall in line for you. That concept of like the modern nation state is not left-leaning, okay? And yeah, but honestly, this is not about left and right. Like I don't like, so stupid.
This isn't leftism, okay? Jesus.
Okay. I think it is leftist. I think there's a leftist element to saying like no, like if the majority of people in these areas want independence, they should probably have it. And I think there is a leftist element to like decentralization of power. I think that one of the biggest problems in something like the Soviet Union was that the power was too centralized. And yeah, like I think that having like more freedom, and that people can like, I would be a separatist all the way down to the individual. I think individuals should be able to be separatists, you know. That's where I would go, like, because I'm an anarchist, right? I don't believe in the state, so I have a different perspective on it. But even if you're a liberal, like a fucking liberal, you know, you should still recognize the rights of self-determination, especially after the social order has gone up in flames and a government has been overthrown. I keep repeating that, like, oh, an elected government had been overthrown, but it's because it's like people don't take that into the equation at all when it comes to these separatists, and they just pretend that it's just completely a Russian thing, like oh, like, no, like Ukraine is a divided country, okay? Sorry, they are.
Ukraine entered a civil war, which was also a proxy war with Russia.
Oh, okay, well, at least they acknowledge there was a proxy war with Russia. Do you want to expand on that a little bit? Because civil war is giving it a little too much credit, I think.
Decades.
Okay, so what about the Syrian civil war? That was a proxy war and a civil war, right? I mean, you can have a civil war and a proxy war at the same time. Probably most civil wars in like the 21st century are gonna be proxy wars as well, or the 20th century as well. Maybe that's always been the case, I don't know.
Of austerity and corruption, the Ukrainian army was totally unable to fight. So a lot of the action.
I mean, surely you wouldn't deny that the Syrian civil war is also a proxy war, right? I mean, just look at all the different groups that the US has been funding, that Russia has been funding, that Turkey has been funding. Yeah, it's obviously a proxy war.
Fell instead to the people who were the most violent,
so it's not
the ultranationalists. So a new
that is true. It's a little bit Weasley to frame it that way. The most violent it'd probably be more accurate to say the most radicalized, the most willing and able to fight against Russia. But that's kind of a semantic thing. Yeah, it's fair. That's fair.
Paramilitary emerged. It was called the Azov Battalion. And unlike the official Ukrainian military, Azov's volunteers were willing to go the distance. But Azov wasn't just any random organization. It was a pretty disturbing far-right group. It had come out of neo-Nazi street gangs that had been used as muscle by Ukrainian elites in the 90s and 2000s. Azov members regularly sported tattoos of swastikas. Their symbol was based on a Nazi emblem. Their leader declared that their mission was to, quote, lead the white races of the world in a final crusade against the Semite-led Untermenschen, subhumans.
If I called these guys Nazis, people online would say that I'm engaging in Godwin's law. Guys, you guys, you'll just call anyone a Nazi.
Not me, I won't.
You'll just call anyone.
I think they are Nazis.
A Nazi, man. The word.
Did you know they were inducted into the National Guard of Ukraine?
Doesn't even mean anything anymore.
But Azov's neo-Nazism turned out not to be such a huge concern to the Ukrainian government.
Yep.
Because in 2014, a guy named Arsen Avakov became Interior Minister
What is Vaush gonna say about this?
in charge of police and security. And Avakov had been a longtime patron of the neo-Nazi gangs. And when he was a regional governor, he used them as enforcers. So when he became Interior Minister, Avakov had the Azov Battalion incorporated into Ukraine's National Guard. Ukraine is the only country to have a neo-Nazi formation in its military.
Wow.
Literally like an official, sector of the National Guard of Ukraine.
The only country to have an explicit neo-Nazi.
Yeah, but Vaush, that matters. Yeah, that's true. That's the only country to have an explicit one. Of course, yeah, like in law enforcement, there's plenty of fucking fascists. Of course, we all know that. But that kind of says something. Do you think that says something about the kind of political orientation of the Ukrainian central government?
Formation in their military. You gotta, it's more common than you might think.
Yeah.
So as the war
still, the explicit part of that matters.
was heating up, the U.S. government announced.
Yeah, the only country honest enough to admit it. That's why we love our Ukrainians. Okay. America, Germany, a bunch of countries, Russia, they all have their far-right neo-Nazi battalions, but at least the Ukrainians have the stones to own up to it. Gotta respect that.
Yeah, the fuck, what are you talking about, Vaush? You're not gonna address that at all?
It would start helping the Ukrainian.
You're not gonna address how that kind of counters some of the things you've said in this video? How you've kind of hand-waved the Nazi elements of Euromaidan and like the new order of the Ukraine, the influence of like far-right nationalists, how you hand-waved that away and said like, oh, those are just like bad apples, those are just like individuals, like they were literally incorporated into the National Guard of Ukraine. So I don't know. Like, I'm not saying like they're all Nazis or anything. I'm not saying that that's most Ukrainians are Nazis or anything, like West Ukrainians are Nazis or anything like that. Of course not. Probably not even most people in the central government are Nazis, right? I'm not saying that. But yeah, like I think this is a concern that you should probably take into account.
Government.
We're upholding the
hold on. Okay. So let's back up a couple of steps here, okay? Now, I want to be clear about this, all right? The Azov Battalion, every single person in it, okay, they can Jonestown themselves for all I care, okay? They can find a big old bleach fountain. I don't give a shit, okay? I firmly encourage all of them to quickly meet with the end of their barrels. I do not care, all right? First and foremost. Second of all, the way information is being presented in this is very, very interesting and very, very deliberate to me, okay? So when leftists talk about stuff like ISIS, we're usually quick to point out that even though ISIS is really bad, their existence and their power is a product of Western imperialism. Because that's true. ISIS, a bunch of shit in that region, would not exist if it weren't for the fact that we've historically meddled in their affairs and worsened material conditions to the point that crazy fucking caliphate, militant groups are like things that emerge, The issue that I have is that right now that very simple level of analysis is not being applied because...
No, I'll apply it. Fine. Yes. They're like part of the reason why there's like nationalist sentiment or whatever is because of Russia as a neighbor. Yes. You're right. You're moving the goalpost, okay?
Because this
now
is a USA bad, Russia good narrative. What's happening here is really obvious.
That's a stupid narrative. I think it's interesting how I get lumped into that whenever I like try to put any nuance when it comes to this like separatist shit or like whatever is happening in Ukraine. I get fucking labeled as like a fucking complete pro-Russian fanatic. It's like, no, I do take that into my analysis, motherfucker.
This country, Ukraine, in 2014, was broke, hollowed out, and facing a proxy war from their massively more powerful neighbor, Russia.
Okay, but like obviously, I don't like that framing either because like the Ukrainian army is massively more powerful than the separatists. So, which are also getting, the Ukrainian army is also getting aid from like other countries as well. So yeah, like, I don't know, like, obviously we haven't seen the separatists completely destroying the Ukrainian army, right? We see like almost like an equilibrium. So yeah, like they have gotten help from Russia and it has allowed them to survive basically. Right?
Under those circumstances,
like I don't think this is not comparable to a total war between Ukraine and Russia. That's not what's happening. So I think it's a little bit disingenuous.
Do you think they would just roll over and let the separatists do what they want? Or do you think they would employ any military faction within their power, up to and including neo-Nazis?
Okay, okay. Oh, God.
If you're a left...
I mean, okay, but just don't say that the whole premise of the video is that neo-Nazi groups have been funded. And then it turns out that's true. And then you go like, oh, well, let's look at the nuance. Like, because you were going into this video kind of presenting it as like misinformation. And it's literally fucking true, Like, of course there are like material reasons, blah, 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 of course. But it doesn't change the fact that it happened, right? Like, it... And again, like, there didn't have to be this, like, this conflict didn't have... I don't think this conflict had to happen. I think they could have I think there probably was a diplomatic solution, but the central government in Ukraine never even bothered to do it because they wanted to force the eastern Ukrainian part to be basically part of the country, and they wanted to assert the will on these territories. Against the will, largely, I think, against the will of the people there. So if they wanted to find out what the people really thought, they should have had a fucking referendum. They should have had a process to figure that out, but they opted for war, and they opted to align themselves with neo-Nazis.
A Marxist, material conditions seem to favor the latter approach. Now, that's not a moral defense. That's not a justification. Okay. You all remember my, disclaimer at the beginning of this particular spiel vis-a-vis ends of barrels, but, like, this is just pretty simple, straightforward Like, you guys understand what I'm talking about.
Okay. I mean, oh god. Isn't Russia doing the same thing? Or do you just think that like there is no concern about like NATO? I guess you do. I guess you just think it's like a defensive alliance and Russia just needs to deal with it. I mean, any kind of look at Russian history would like it's obvious why they don't buy into that narrative, right? But let's just keep watching.
About right? To me, at least, it seems pretty obvious. Like, oh, wow, they have basically no options to defend themselves. They're facing a proxy war. Like, okay, they're going to use, like, any extremist group they...
They're facing a proxy war. Like, what is the chance? Like, is there any chance that the separatists would have just, like, kept going and just going for, like, all the way to Kiev? No, they wanted independence in these East Ukrainian areas. And the central government, the new central government in Ukraine that hadn't really been elected by the East Ukrainian part of the country, wanted so badly to prevent them from like getting self-determination that they allied themselves with a neo-Nazi group.
They can to defend. Yeah.
Like, this is such a galaxy brain take.
So the natural thing that I would expect the leftists to say is the Azov battalion can go f themselves. However, the thing we need to do to prevent stuff like this from happening is to put an end to Russian imperialism. That, to me, that's just like a one-to-one thing. That just makes so much sense to me. But that is not the way this information is being framed.
Nazi formation in its military. So as the war was heating up, the US government announced it would start helping the Ukrainian government.
We're upholding the principle that bigger nations can't bully the small by opposing Russian aggression.
Okay, but why can the central government in Kiev bully the eastern parts of Ukraine and the separatists' territories? Isn't that what's happening? Also very rich coming from the US, right? But we're not going to do the whataboutism thing here because I know you're all going to freak out at me. But obviously, I mean, the US talking about like bigger countries bullying smaller countries, I mean, it's completely ridiculous, right?
And supporting Ukraine's democracy and reassuring our NATO allies.
That's that's fine. Based Obama. Sure, go for it.
It would send money, training, and quote, defensive lethal aid. Weapons.
Yeah.
And as all that flowed in, Azov became a beneficiary. The research group Bellingcat showed that Azov was receiving access to American grenade launchers.
Vaush is just like digging a hole deeper and deeper here.
The Daily Beast investigation showed that US trainers were unable to prevent aid from reaching neo-Nazis.
So,
yeah, of course.
Yeah, obviously, if they're a part of the defensive forces of Ukraine, then weapons that reach Ukraine are going to fall into their hands, right? So it seems like the way to solve this would be to, you know, attempt to...
He's like lost, you don't know.
Prevent the emergence of the conditions which require the Ukrainian government to employ these people? Like, right?
Okay.
A headline was 2022. It could be a retrospective.
Oh god. And you're saying that this like Gravel Institute video is like framing it in a dishonest way, but like you're like going all the way here. Like talk about mental gymnastics.
And Azov itself posted a video of the unit welcoming representatives from NATO. Some in the US were concerned about all of this. They warned that arming neo-Nazis would pose a threat to Ukrainian minorities and to Ukrainian democracy. But whenever Congress tried to ban funding for Azov, the Defense Department had those provisions removed.
Well, hold on. Banned funding for Azov. First of all, for a while, I'm pretty sure we actually did have funding banned for Azov. But second of all, how would you do that? If the weapons are being given to Ukraine, do you give them under the stipulation?
Sounds like there were some kind of measures in place and they removed them. But again, might be false. I don't know. Maybe it's not true.
That the arms are never given to the Azov battalion? I suppose that's possible, but it'd be really difficult to enforce.
Yeah, I don't know.
So the US continued funding Azov for years.
I really don't like that framing.
Okay.
I don't like that framing. And I know that other lefties...
Like, I don't know how US funding works. is it like just is it just centralized, like they just give a bunch of shit to like some central kind of command in like Ukraine, and then they kind of distribute it, or do the US kind of directly fund smaller groups of the Ukrainian army? Because in that case they could try to, I mean, they could just not do it to Azov, but it really depends on the specifics of how that happens, and I'm really not sure about that.
Wouldn't like that framing, because they have in the past historically defended the funding of anti-imperialist groups that have extremist sects within them, but they don't frame it as like this right here is conservative framing. Yeah, like Hamas. Like if you fund Palestinians, money goes to Hamas, and therefore you are directly funding anti-Semitic attacks on Israel. It's a generalization that's used, again, to deny the ability to provide any support for a just cause, because elements of the support that would be given would go towards bad people. That's not to say it can never be brought up, but the fact that this is being presented so matter-of-factly and in such a reductionist way is pretty bad.
It wasn't until 2018 that funding was banned, and that the State Department labeled Azov a, quote, nationalist hate group. Ukraine is still mired in a war on its territory, and the Russian government likes to use Ukrainian nationalists in its propaganda, part of its practice of painting all Ukrainians as Nazis. Of course, those claims aren't really true.
Oh, that's nice.
But Ukraine still does have a serious and militarized neo-Nazi problem. And
how big is the Azov battalion these days anyway? Hasn't it been here? Wait.
These days.
Current
I mean,
status.
They're not saying that it's happening now. They're saying that like the U.S. has been funding them. Like how America funded. It's like past tense, right? So, I mean, maybe they're smaller now. I don't know.
Ukraine decided to turn all volunteer battalions, both the territorial defense battalions associated with the armed forces and the Special Task Patrol Police Force of the Interior Ministry, into regular units of the Ukrainian Armed Forces and the National Guard, respectively. Azov is one of the latter. The Ukrainian government also often deployed only volunteer units to the Donbass front, pledging conscripts would not be sent into combat. Let's see. Since 2015, the battalion has been upgraded to regimental status, and Azov is now officially called Special Operations Detachment, with combat duties focused on reconnaissance, counter-reconnaissance, EOD disposal, interdiction, special weapon operations. Organized into these command units. Is there like
so they're just trying to like they're trying to kind of take it apart, the whole the symbolic kind of categorization of it, like Azov battalion, and they're trying to take it apart and like print it out in like whatever language is normally used in the army for different sectors, to try to, I guess it's like PR, right?
like a number of people currently in them? A couple thousand? I saw 900 in 2015. 900 in 2015. I wonder how big it is right now.
It doesn't really matter that much.
Support extends beyond Azov.
What matters is that the central government is willing to ally with them, and the fact that there's such a small amount of people also show that I mean, they probably weren't that. I mean, if it was like 50,000 people, you'd be like, okay. I mean, in this like realpolitik way, you'd be like, okay, fine. Like maybe in this area, you kind of have to make like a deal with the devil or whatever in order to fight your enemy. You know, enemy of my enemy is my friend or whatever. But in this case, they're literally just like 1,000 people. Like, I'm not saying that's nothing, but it's like you probably didn't even need to incorporate them into the, and you didn't even need to do that. You know, you could have just like how the Iraqi government fought ISIS using the help of Shia militias, right? They didn't like make them a part of the army; they just aligned with them. But they actually made this battalion a part of the official Ukrainian National Guard.
Even today, far-right groups continue to benefit from training by Western countries.
Okay, I'm getting
American politicians have met with far-right leaders.
So long.
I wonder if they're going to propose a solution to this, by the way. Like, do they have a way? Is the implied solution just don't help Ukraine defend themselves? Or is it just like, we're going to use... Because it seems to me like this is kind of...
Yes. Yeah, probably. I don't know. I mean, you're talking about it as if... Again, you're just assuming that the current government in Western Ukraine is legitimate, and that the separatists, the East Ukrainian population, don't matter. So yeah, I don't think it's America's job to meddle in this like how can you honestly talk shit about like Russia engaging in proxy warfare when the US does the same in the same conflict? I mean, then we have to have a conversation about the legitimacy of these like actors, right? But you're not willing to do that. You just assume that because most countries recognize the Ukrainian government as like the legitimate government after the overthrow of the previous one. I mean, I guess you just think that means that we don't have to discuss it, and that there is no legitimacy to any kind of separatist sentiment. I don't know why you'd think that, but definitely not as an anarchist. I don't know why you'd think that. Definitely not as someone who claims to love freedom and democracy. I don't know why you would have that opinion, and why you would throw the East Ukrainians under the bus, and why you would throw separatists under the bus. I don't get that.
Of Mott and Bailey. If the argument here is far-right neo-Nazi nationalists in Ukraine bad, then yeah, totally agreed. Yeah. But if the implied solution to this is allow Ukraine to be stomped by Russia, then...
of Ukraine, this is your moment.
During the protests, American Senator John McCain made a public appearance with a leader of the far-right Svoboda party.
That's bad.
This guy. He had previously been kicked out of Ukraine's parliament for extreme anti-Semitism. And here's that same guy meeting with then Vice President Joe Biden. So since the 2014 uprising, Ukraine's far right has become increasingly powerful.
Had a point.
Azov veterans have been given high positions in the security services. In 2016, Andriy Parubi, pictured here when he was leading a neo-Nazi party in the 90s, became Speaker of the Ukrainian Parliament, even as he continued to offer praise for Adolf Hitler. Here's Parubi meeting with John McCain. The new Ukrainian government even made it a criminal offense to deny Bandera's heroism.
Really? Really? Is that true? Oh, how's Vaush?
And in 2021...
Wait, hold on. That's
true?
wild. Hold on.
Yeah, that is wild, isn't it? But it doesn't matter. That doesn't matter, right? That doesn't matter. No, that's just like... No, like... They had to align with this, like, far-right battalion because that was just they just had to do it to stop Russia.
Wait, hold on. Legislation made the two World War II paramilitaries, the organization here's Ukraine, and made it a criminal offense to deny their heroism. Made it a criminal offense to deny their heroism. Can I get that exact article?
Let's see.
Ukraine.
It's just like panicking. I think it's true. I honestly
just look up the article title. Yeah, I found it. You can just type up anything. You'll find it.
Let's see.
In 2015, the Ukrainian parliament passed legislation making two World War II paramilitaries, Organization Ukrainian Nationalist Insurgent Army, Here's Ukraine, criminal offense to deny their heroism. Damn! That's some 1984 bullshit. Right?
Yes, it is. That's what I was talking about. That's the kind of anti-free speech shit that you have been seeing. That's why it's like, that's why it's, you shouldn't take it seriously when they call them terrorists. And when they call them terrorists, that is coming from the same kind of war on terror, authoritarian mindset. Okay? And that's a far right thing. Okay?
Right there. Holy shit. In order to save Ukraine from their far-right sentiments, we must improve their material conditions by preventing them from being taken over by Russia.
Criminal offense to deny Bandera.
Yeah, they shouldn't be taken over by Russia. Yeah, I don't think so. However, I do think that the separatist areas, the eastern Ukrainian areas, should have the right to self-determination, and probably, like, if they really want to be part of Russia, they should fucking be able to. I'm sorry, dude. That's democracy, okay? That's like freedom, okay? I'm sorry you're so against freedom and democracy. I'm really sorry.
Bandera's heroism. And in 2021, the United States and Ukraine...
I guess I'm the liberal now.
...were the only two countries to vote against a UN resolution condemning the glorification of Nazism. A climate of impunity has developed around far-right violence. Attacks against Roma and gay people go unpunished. A 2018 report found that Ukraine had more incidents of anti-Semitic hate crimes than all other post-Soviet republics combined.
I think they're painting this extremely dishonestly, as I understand. Bandera is revered mainly for his fight against the USSR, not his beliefs. It doesn't really matter. If you're venerating people like that, like, it's pretty clear where Ukraine's at.
And it's a crime to deny that he was, like, a hero? What the fuck?
Right now.
So that's the story of how the far right helped cause...
Like that's so like just transparent authoritarianism.
The country to fracture. But it's also a story about America, how America's support helped legitimize the far right and allowed it to build influence. And
that's pretty disingenuous framing. So pretty much the entirety of the West was supportive of Ukraine's push away from Russia. Obviously, you know, different elements of the American, like not everything's about America here, okay? Like I know America bad and all of that, but like, yeah, the need to frame this as some kind of like American promoting the far right. The far right in Ukraine were clearly prominent, present, active, and engaged.
But I mean, America is supporting them by supporting the like. There's obviously like a tie. That like there's obviously like influence there. There's obviously like serious. I don't know.
Before Americans' behavior didn't cause this. Russians did. Russia created the material conditions that led to the extreme popularity of far-right nationalist groups in Ukraine. I don't know why.
What if America said like, hey, like, okay, there's an like there's been like a what if like all the Western countries, the EU and NATO and America said like, there's been like a overturning of the social order in Ukraine. The government, the state is in collapse. The government has been overthrown. There is a dramatic, like there's like overwhelming secessionist sentiment in eastern Ukraine, in certain territories at least of eastern Ukraine and Crimea. Let's just have like a fucking kind of neutral approach to it, and let's try to work out some kind of federalist system or something like that. No, that didn't happen. What happened was that the new government instantly declared the separatists terrorists, and they intervened militarily. And yeah, like I mean that's basically what happened, you know. And I feel the same way in terms of this like neutral approach. I feel the same way about NATO. I think it would be. I heard this was like an idea that Dan Carlin gave me, that that he came up with. I don't know if he probably didn't come up with it, but he made the argument in one of his podcasts called I think Poking the Bear, where he suggested that NATO is kind of outdated, and how that it would be great to have a more neutral European military defense alliance that allows these European countries to band together in case of like a Russian type of invasion. But it would be without the giant military might of the US, who obviously have bigger military than like the top, what is it, like the top 3 militaries combined, except for maybe it's top 5, except for the US themselves, of course. Of course, that puts Russia on edge. So I mean, yeah, like you could have done that instead of, these countries could have, after the Cold War, could have gone for this like kind of doctrine of neutrality instead of this like aggressive like NATO expansion. I think that would have been so great, like to just have like that would have been more neutral, right? That would have been a balance of power then. I mean, you have to understand from a realpolitik point of view why Russia is doing this, and that's not to defend them, but it is just to hammer that home, you know, like they do consider NATO as a threat, because there is this like there is and so much of it really is like because the US is a big part of it.
Like, we're so desperate to do this, man. And look, if we're responsible for ISIS, they're responsible for the Azov Battalion. You can't get around that. The USSR fucked Ukraine up. Russia continues to fuck Ukraine up. Like, it's really weird to pretend to be an anti-imperialist when it comes out that you're not actually anti-imperialist. You're pro-imperialism, as long as it's not the West.
Damn, but it's almost like you don't want, and the US certainly don't want to resolve this conflict in any kind of diplomatic way. They just supply them with weapons. They buy into this like terrorist narrative, and they buy into this narrative that they're just like obviously the official government of Ukraine, and like, which is like kind of ridiculous when they don't have the support of like the Eastern territories.
If the West does anything wrong, then your material analysis skills are on point. But if it's some country like Russia doing the same shit just to a different like situation, then it's like, oh well, twist my back around to see if I can find a way to you know, make this about America. And you know people like this are never going to do videos on how, like, Russian involvement in Syria backs their far-right. Like, Russia explicitly supports far-right dictator Assad, who, like, falsifies elections and cracks down on internal dissent and caused one of the worst...
Okay, but it's not like the ones that the U.S. supplied. Like, didn't U.S. literally... It's been a while since I read about this, but didn't the U.S. literally supply, like, al-Nusra with, like, funding and shit like that? And the Free Syrian Army also allied themselves with al-Nusra, I believe. I mean, Syria is a clusterfuck, but, yeah, I don't know.
Worst refugee crises in all of human history. And like this direct product of Russian support, like chemical weapons on its own people, but like
I think be careful before you go into Syria, because that's a very complicated discussion.
You know, that we don't talk about that because that's also resisting American imperialism and, you know, whatever.
But no, I don't buy that. I'm not a supporter of Assad, by the way. I support Rojava because well, I like them. And I like insurrection against the state. I am a fan of that. You know?
Whatever.
Especially when it's like a kind of anarchist, left-leaning movement like Rojava. I wish we would see that in more similar movements, and maybe in the West and other areas of the world.
Just...
That's a pattern you see over and over in American foreign policy. Getting involved in places that we don't really understand and supporting groups.
What? Wait, what? We don't understand. Wait, who's we? The Pentagon? Wait, are we talking about all of us? Wait, America as a country doesn't understand anything about anywhere. That's why America, we don't have a referendum on every piece of legislation that passed through Congress. This isn't a war that we didn't invade anyone here. We decided to send arms and training to Ukraine because it's to our benefit that they don't fall into Russia's sphere of influence. Like, but yeah, like, what is that?
Lesser evils that
oh my God.
Involved in places that we don't really understand and supporting groups, lesser evils, that we think serve our interests.
This is a pro-imperialist argument right here.
No, it isn't. How is it a pro-imperialist argument? When did they like say that like they supported the Russian actions in Ukraine?
And then being surprised when the blowback hits us in the face.
Wait. What blowback? Wait, hold on. First of all, nothing has hit us in the face.
Literally like the Russian invasion that people are talking about, like literally like Russia being like aggressive is like a blowback to this. I don't know why you can't see that. Again, like the US could have remained neutral and they could have not sent arms to the Western Ukrainian government, and they could have kind of been supporting a diplomatic, peaceful process that could have resolved this crisis, essentially, and could have not just written off the separatists as terrorists. That would have, if they could have just remained neutral, independent kind of territories, I think Russia would have been fine with that. I don't think really Putin needs these territories to be part of Russia. I don't even know if he really wants that. But again, there was just this complete these after the overthrow of the Yanukovych, these are the legitimate government of this country, and East Ukraine just needs to shut the fuck up. And the type of blowback you're gonna see is like, of course, like that Russia is gonna ramp up the it's the separatist movement, and it's the Russian aggression, which I don't support. But I'm also not going to be completely fucking naive about it and pretend that it has nothing to do with NATO expansion. It's nothing to do with U.S. military support and things like that.
America hasn't been affected by this at all. Second of all of the far-right sentiments that exist right now were there before 2014 when we
blowback can like affect other people than just Americans. Vaush.
Recognize their interim leader like we do with every other leader. What What? Has Ukraine done a 9/11 on us? Is the blowback?
I love how like Americans just like think that only America exists, and that like it's like literally like a war in Europe for the first time in like a long time, and like he's just like, well, there was no 9/11, so I guess there's no pushback.
Supposed to be Russia invading Ukraine. Yeah, was the blowback in 2014 before we sent them arms? When was the blowback? What happened?
There was a blowback, I guess, to NATO expansion. I guess if like there wasn't this NATO expansion, I don't think that would have happened. I don't think that invasion would have happened if there was like a more neutral approach. Yeah, but I'm not saying that to defend. And again, like I know like people are gonna think that I'm defending Russia here, and I guess in some ways I am like and if you think that like applying a kind of understanding of why someone might like a motivation is defending someone. I mean, in that case, you're also defending the Azov battalion and ISIS, right? Because you're kind of trying to understand the motivation behind why they exist, the material conditions, blah blah blah. So, in that case, I guess I'm defending them. But no, like I don't support it, and I wish it didn't happen. So.
Like, this is so fucking reductionist, dude. This is
you are so fucking reductionist.
An effort to paint every single geopolitical incident that America is involved in as the exact same as the Iraq War, which I've noticed from a lot of
This is like the Iraq War was a lot worse, I would say.
lefties. Like, it's this line: they lied to us about the Iraq War, therefore.
I mean, I think a lot more people died in the Iraq War. I mean,
we should get all our news from Russia Today, you know. But
I think it's actually I don't like this idea of like shunning Russia Today completely, because I think that Russia Today might actually of course they're not reliable news source. Of course they're gonna have bias in favor of Russia, but in terms of like news from America, they might report on shit that you will never hear in a like legitimate stuff that you would never hear in an American kind of mainstream media. I mean, they have J-Reg on, or Drake, or whatever you call him, right? like they have like Caleb Maupin on. I don't like Caleb Maupin. Like I think he sucks. But it just shows you that there are some things are possible in Russia Today that wouldn't be possible elsewhere. So I don't think you should completely shun it. I think it's worth reading Russia Today.
It's incredibly reductionist. Lefties used to be renowned for their excellent historical and economic analysis, and such a shame to see how far we've fallen in that respect.
In Central America, in the Middle East.
It's really crazy.
See, everything is the same. Everything is exactly the same. Us overthrowing democratically elected leaders in Latin America, invading Southeast Asia and the Middle East is exactly the same as us giving weapons to a democratically elected leader because they're being subjected to a proxy war from their neighbor. These are all exactly...
You're the one with the reductionist take here, Vaush, okay? As I've explained throughout this video, there's so many blind spots to your analysis here, and there's so many things you're not looking at, okay? So please don't call other people's takes reductionist.
The same thing.
Southeast Asia, and now in Ukraine.
Yes, these are all the same thing.
I mean, they're not the
I'm
same
Hadia
thing.
Afzal, Advocacy Associate for Just Foreign Policy for the Gravel Institute.
I mean, they're different cases.
Nice.
Anyways.
Nice memes.
Yeah.
God damn it, dude. We had that false flag car bomb shit earlier today, man. The Russian apologists are out in force on Twitter right now.
And I guess I'm one of them, right? Because anyone who has any contrary opinion is going to be labeled as a Russian apologist. Well, let me tell you, I don't like Russia. I don't like what they're doing. I also don't like that America is engaging in a proxy war. I don't like that the separatists have completely thrown under the bus. I don't like how people who supposedly have like values such as like democracy and self-determination turn those around when it comes to, because they're like allied to Russia or whatever. Yeah, I don't like how, I really don't like the discourse on this. I hate it. I've hated it since 2014. I think it's so toxic and really reactionary, to be honest. Yeah, I just hope that we can get a better discourse about it. That's what I would say about it.
They're like mass searching all.
And Vaush is just, I'm getting so tired of Vaush. Like, holy shit. Like, he just has the most... You just always can count on him to have, like, whatever lip take, I feel.
All tags and all associated terms.
He's expected to have, you know?
To
He's just
respond.
this, like, product of, like, social media, I feel. He's just this, like, collage of all these different, all of the opinions that you're kind of supposed to have. That's like I guess like I don't know, what should you call him? A neoliberal leftist? Is that fair? I mean, he loves like market economies and things like that, right? I don't know. Maybe that's harsh. Maybe I'm being too harsh on Bosch. I don't know. I just feel like he's become more dishonest and less able to kind of. I just feel like I feel like he's very influenced by his audience and like wants approval of them. And I wish he would just engage a little bit more honestly, I guess, on different things. But yeah, this was my should we finish
onto
it?
everything with like, well, why are you warmongering by pointing out that Russia's warmongering, you know?
You're not. Russia is warmongering. Russia is engaging in war. So is the United States in a type of proxy warfare kind of situation. Obviously not on the same level. Yeah, obviously, like I have summarized everything I need to summarize. I'm gonna stop the stream now, and hopefully it works. I don't know, it's my first stream, so let's if I press end stream, hopefully it should appear on my channel. All right, have a good one, guys.